Representative Nardone.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to offer an amendment, LC 00862-3.
One moment, please, Representative. Let me get it. I have it. Representative Nardone moves amendment LC 000-862/3. That is seconded by Representative Petrucci, Representative Price, Representative Place, Leader Filippi, Representative Roberts, Whip Chippendale. Proceed, Representative.
Okay, what this does is on page 36, lines 14 through 19, it restores all stricken language. Also on page 37, lines 22 through 36, it also restores all stricken language of that as well. This was a law that was passed in 2014. It passed the Senate, it passed the House, and it was signed into law by the governor. I see no reason why this has to be stricken from this article.
Representative Kazara, are you on the amendment? You are not. As soon as we vote this, I will get to you. Whip Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I rise in opposition to this amendment. The trigger that Representative Nardone is talking about was voted in years ago by another legislature, and since then, the entire sales tax structure has actually changed. If we wanted to actually reinstitute this trigger, we would be some $80 million in the hole. I would recommend to Representative Nardone that if you really want to submit a bill that reduces the sales tax, that you submit it next season. I will be more than glad to co-sponsor with you. I introduced one my second year here that would reduce the sales tax to 3% and make it revenue neutral. And unfortunately, I think it was the members of your party who actually opposed it. But if you want to introduce that piece of legislation, I will be more than glad to be a co-sponsor. This is something that will restore the trigger and put a major hole long-term in our budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Whip Edwards. I appreciate that very much, because for the past 4 months, all of our state leaders have been saying the trigger hasn't been met because there was no act of Congress, and the sales tax on internet sales was authorized by a Supreme Court decision. So the language of this isn't applicable. To hear now today that restoring this language would create an $80 million hole, I'm flabbergasted. Are we saying that for the past 3 months we should have been paying 6.5% sales tax? I don't understand the argument. All state leaders said that this trigger was never met by our passage 3 months ago of the sales tax on internet sales. If the interpretation of our state leaders is right and this trigger hasn't been met, then there's no budget hole created because we need to wait for an act of Congress and not a Supreme Court decision. So I'm just confused. It seems like there's been inconsistent positions going back and forth. If you're right and we do have a budget hole, that means that we should have been paying 6.5% for the past 3 months. Thank you, Speaker.
Just curious, do you have $80 million of savings to go along with the amendment?
Thank you, Speaker. I believe our position tonight is that we need an act of Congress for the amendment, the trigger to happen.
Okay. So just for the record, you don't have $80 million of cuts that would be acceptable to the public?
I don't think that...
Is it a balanced amendment?
No.
Fair enough. Representative Newberry is correct. I should not engage in the debate. I was just wondering if you had $80 million of cuts. My error. I apologize. Leader Shekarchi.
Mr. Speaker, you stole my thunder. I appreciate the...
Not appropriate, but I couldn't help myself,
I understand.
Leader.
I understand. I appreciate the bipartisan work, and maybe we could work together to look at the sales tax. And I think, I don't want to speak for Whip Edwards, but I think he was saying if in fact this happened, there would be an $80 million hole. And as we all know, that we have a constitutional responsibility to pass a balanced budget. So I too will co-sponsor that legislation, but we need to work We need to work to find, yes, we worked very good on our tax cut, Leader Filippi, but that's in this article as well. We need to find, the speaker is correct, we need to find $80 million. If you want to be serious and you want to be real, and I understand, you know, it's budget day, we have our wonderful friends from the press here and TV, but if you're going to propose a tax cut and it costs money, the responsible thing to do is identify how you're going to make up the revenue or what programs you're going to cut. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Whip Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You are correct, Leader Filippi. The trigger has not been set yet because it has not been met. This is in case it does. We don't know how Congress is going to act. They could trigger this any day, like they could do many things. So in order to avoid a potential $80 million hole, I would oppose this amendment.
Representative Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. I actually was not going to talk on this. I just wanted to correct the record. Whip Edwards, your tax bill in 2011 was an excellent piece of legislation because I was your lead co-sponsor. It was bipartisan. It was not opposed by the Republicans at all. It was a great bill. Unfortunately, we had the misfortune to introduce it about 2 days before the newly elected and inaugurated independent Governor Chafee introduced a not so great sales tax plan, which would have raised taxes and which caused everyone to look at your bill and the one that I sponsored as something it was not, and we got excoriated in public, and the idea died. I hope you do introduce it again. It was a good piece of legislation, but it was not opposed by the Republican Party. I want to make that very clear.
Representative Nardone.
I just want to say one more thing. Being a new representative up here, I don't believe the word passage in this law was used as an escape clause, and that's essentially what we're doing. If the word passage was put there as an escape clause, we're not being truly transparent with the taxpayers in this state. And I understand budget shortfalls and that, but this was something that was written into law. It was passed by both sides of the Senate, the House, and the governor signed it. It's time we should be keeping our word. This language should not be struck out. Thanks.
Whip Chippendale.
Thank you, Speaker. I think to imply that an amendment we're putting in is for the benefit of the media is completely inappropriate, and I hope I don't hear it again. I think to question us on where we're going to find a number that's very specious and argumentative is also inappropriate, because if we had the fiscal staff at our beck and call every day of the year, I guarantee you we'd find a hell of a lot more than $80 million to save. So those arguments aren't holding water for me. And in fact, this isn't done because people are here. On March 31st, I stood here and Rep. Nardone stood here on this very issue and talked about the 6.5%. And unfortunately, I kind of predicted it was going to be a budget article that would eliminate it, and I hate when that happens. This is not a trick. This is a promise. This is an old legislature from the days of old, as was implied. This article, or this statute, was taken up. It was written in 2011 after a gold ribbon panel assessed the online resellers issue and the impending taxation that everyone expected to come down the pike. This panel recommended this. This body voted on it in 2011. We enacted it into law. The body across the street did the same, and the governor signed it. In 2012, we went into the same exact section, 1818, I believe it was. And we did not see fit to change that 6.5. And then in 2013, we went back into the very same statute, and we still saw fit not to change that. And guess what? Happened again in 2014, and on and on. Folks, this isn't something that some archaic old group of old dudes up in the State House smoking cigars in the smoky-filled back room. This just happened. We just did this. The majority of the members in this room were part of the legislature that approved that article in that statute. So to say this is some old thing is ridiculous. It's disingenuous. The bottom line is this. We made a promise to the Rhode Island taxpayers that we were going to drop our sales tax to 6.5%. Because remember, after all, we only bumped it up to 7% until we got through the DEPCO crisis, and then it was going back to 6 anyway, right? Yeah, because what goes up must come down, I suppose. we can put bills in next year, and I look forward to all this wonderful cooperation being offered tonight. That's going to be great to work on bills next year. But we're here now. We're offering a legitimate amendment on an argument that we've been making since March, that the media's been talking about since March. This isn't new. This isn't old from an old legislature. Let's be honest, and let's put let's be honest with ourselves. This is upholding a promise that we made repeatedly over the past 9 years, 8 years, to the people that we represent. Let's not kick sand in their face, please.
Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the amendment, and I will just point out the fact that when this came up a few months back and there was a brouhaha from our colleagues across the aisle about, oh, all of a sudden we're 6.5, right? Everyone tried to hang their hat on that a United States Supreme Court decision is a passage of a federal law. It's not. It's dictionary definition. Congress is Congress, a whole separate branch, and the United States Supreme Court is at the top of the judiciary. We did not have a trigger. I would also point out to my colleagues across the aisle, getting a tax cut this year. Thanks to Speaker Mattiello's leadership, the car tax is being phased out. Our citizens are getting good relief from taxation. And let's point out, if we cut, at the end of the day, when it comes to taxes, if we cut and we cut and we cut and we cut and we cut, and we drive right to the bottom of the barrel in terms of services, in terms of what we can provide our citizens, we're not going to have the standard of living that we enjoy today. Taxes are in, and now I'm standing up in favor of taxes, right? Every politician probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to tell you what. They're a necessary evil. They pay for cops and firefighters and schools and roads, and they are investments. We have to balance what we take out versus what the economy puts in. This is a good budget, and this is a specious argument. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Whip Chippendale.
Thank you, Speaker. Based on the last assertion, I feel it's prudent to point out that in the section I was referring to, 44-18-18, the very last line in that statute states, the 6.5% rate shall take effect on the date that the state requires remote sellers to collect and remit sales and use tax. Has nothing to do with passage of Congress in that particular line. It says on the date the state requires it. We required it on March 31st. That's the trigger, my friend.
There are no other lights. On the amendment, clerk, unlock the machine. All in favor, please vote green. Those opposed, red. Clerk, lock the machine. 10 in favor, 62 opposed. The amendment fails.